The moment a narcissist truly slides into desperation is more complex than it appears, and understanding it requires looking beyond their surface theatrics. Many people assume narcissists operate from a constant state of emotional hunger, and in a sense that's true. Everything they do is driven by an unending need for validation. But there is a specific point at which that hunger mutates into a more frantic, unmistakable form of desperation. This shift becomes most visible in the aftermath of what psychologists call the discard, a rupture that can happen whether the narcissist abandons you or you finally detach yourself from them. Regardless of who walks away, the emotional landscape that follows becomes a revealing stage where their inner instability comes sharply into view. It is during this phase that their internal defenses weaken enough for glimpses of genuine desperation to slip through. In the wake of a discard, narcissists frequently oscillate between conflicting impulses. While they usually have a clear sense of what outcome they want, control, obedience, fuel, they often lack a consistent strategy for achieving it. Their desires hinge on the assumption that the person they draw supply from will automatically fall into line. But when that compliance falters, especially after the relationship ends, the narcissist's psychological machinery begins to jam. Although their outward demeanor may project confidence or superiority, internally they are scrambling. They want the world to rearrange itself around their needs, yet they have no reliable blueprint for making it happen without the steady stream of validation they previously extracted from you. Interestingly, the beginning of the post-discard period is often marked by an artificial high. If they initiated the break, they may feel as though they've shed a burden. This illusion of liberation produces an intoxicating surge of excitement. They believe they've reset the game and positioned themselves for a pristine new start. In their mind, they've found someone new to mold, someone uncorrupted by the emotional scars of their manipulation, someone who doesn't yet question their inconsistencies or detect the subtle distortions built into their behavior. This euphoria mirrors the idealization phase they once used on you, and it reinforces their belief that the original problem must have been you, not them. However, this sense of triumph is short-lived. As the novelty of the new supply fades, an uncomfortable awareness begins to settle into the narcissist's psyche. At first, the feeling is vague, more like a shadow than a fully formed thought. They are unable to articulate why they suddenly feel restless or dissatisfied. After all, this new person was supposed to be the cure, the one who would fix everything they felt you failed to fix. Recall how they once declared you the answer to their loneliness, their chaos, their wounds. They showered you with grand labels: soulmate, destiny, divine intervention. These proclamations weren't reflections of genuine partnership, but projections of their own imaginary salvation. And when reality shattered that fantasy, they flipped the script, deciding instead that you were the villain who had ruined their life. This identical cycle now unfolds with the new supply. The pedestal begins to crack. The new person has actual preferences and boundaries. They don't automatically sync their emotions to the narcissist's moods. They don't read their mind or absorb blame on command. They are not yet conditioned to silence their needs or destabilize themselves to maintain the narcissist's fragile equilibrium. And because of this, the narcissist must exert effort, genuine, sustained, emotional effort, to extract the kind of validation that once flowed so effortlessly from you. This is where the process accelerates toward desperation, because beneath the narcissist's inflated sense of superiority lies profound psychological laziness. They believe validation should be handed to them without resistance. They feel entitled to emotional labor they never reciprocate. You, after months or years of erosion, became predictable. You learned how to anticipate their moods, soften their insecurities, and center their needs. You became the emotional equivalent of a finely tuned machine, efficient, responsive, and conditioned to respond in the exact way they required. The new supply is none of those things. Instead, they question inconsistencies. They set boundaries. They maintain friendships, routines, and a stable sense of self. Their world hasn't yet been reorganized around the narcissist's whims. And to a narcissist, this resistance feels intolerable. It disrupts the fantasy of effortless dominance. It reminds them, on some deep, primitive level, that they are not in control. This friction is what begins to trigger the narcissist's rising desperation. Their internal narrative becomes unsettled. The new supply isn't bending fast enough. You are no longer available to prop up their ego. Their source of emotional fuel becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is the narcissist's greatest psychological threat. It is within this growing instability that their desperation takes root, eventually driving them to behaviors and reactions that reveal just how dependent they were on your compliance, your emotional labor, and your willingness to carry the weight of their dysfunction. For the narcissist, this stage is deeply aggravating. They cannot comprehend why their usual charm fails to take effect immediately, and the realization that they must start the entire conditioning process from the ground up infuriates them. The elaborate love bombing, the slow erosion of boundaries, the subtle manipulation designed to create self-doubt, all of it requires effort they resent giving. They believe they could simply replace you as effortlessly as plugging in a new device, only to discover they must rebuild the entire system of control from nothing. This sudden awareness makes them long for the predictability and efficiency of the supply you once provided. As the initial thrill of the new relationship begins to fade, a troubling question creeps into their mind. Did I choose incorrectly? But the issue is never the new person's qualities. It is the narcissist's fundamental misinterpretation of what truly fuels their behavior. Narcissists often derive the greatest excitement from the covert and forbidden aspects of their relationships, the secrecy, the triangulation, the betrayals. These intoxicating dynamics temporarily distract them from the truth of their internal landscape, a cavernous emptiness and an unstable sense of identity. Their self-worth is too fragmented to sustain itself. They need external validation like oxygen. When you exited their life, or when they rashly removed you, they assumed the new supply would instantly stabilize their inner chaos. But when the new person fails to provide the same level of seamless regulation, the narcissist is confronted with a chilling realization. The emptiness remains. Nothing has been fixed. Their emotional quick fix has failed. To grasp the severity of this void, it's essential to understand the psychological difference between healthy solitude and the narcissist's experience of aloneness. For most people, being alone may produce boredom or sadness. For a narcissist, it feels like stepping into an abyss. Without a steady stream of external reflection, they experience a destabilizing sense of non-existence, because their identity is constructed almost entirely through how others react to them. They rely on the emotional mirror that their partner provides to feel real. You are that mirror. The new supply, however, reflects something unfamiliar, something that doesn't reinforce the narcissist's grandeur. With no dependable mirror, they are forced to glimpse the chaos inside, the shame they deny, the envy they conceal, and the rage they justify. This psychological state is unbearable for them, and their desperation becomes less about craving affection and more about escaping a terrifying confrontation with their own fractured self. Your absence magnifies this internal collapse. When you walk away, it shreds their illusion of omnipotence. When they discard you and you fail to chase after them, the wound cuts even deeper. Your silence becomes a direct threat to their ego because it communicates something they cannot tolerate, that you can survive and possibly flourish outside their influence. This punctures their fantasy of indispensability. The narcissist's manipulative tendencies become obvious here, but what's equally striking is their selective blindness, an odd mixture of cunning and emotional ignorance. They are perceptive enough to exploit vulnerabilities, yet completely unable to recognize their own destructive patterns. Once they finally recognize that the missing piece is not merely a partner, but you specifically, your reliability, your compliance, your finely attuned emotional labor, their desperation intensifies. This is the point where their panic transforms into action. When a narcissist reaches this level of psychological crisis, their behavior shifts rapidly into the phase widely known as hoovering, the frantic attempt to pull you back into their orbit. If you have successfully severed all communication and blocked their access, the narcissist's anxiety often escalates into a frenzied search for alternative entry points. They begin reaching out to anyone who might act as a conduit, deploying manipulative maneuvers that have nothing to do with affection. These gestures are not romantic. They are resource-driven survival tactics. The narcissist is scrambling for emotional oxygen, and this panic manifests in a variety of well-known strategies. One of the most common is the sympathy ploy. They may craft dramatic stories about sudden illnesses, devastating injuries, or near-death experiences, hoping fear or guilt will reopen the door. In more extreme cases, they enlist flying monkeys, family members, mutual acquaintances, or even children to deliver messages designed to provoke concern or destabilize your emotional clarity. Another tactic is the staged accidental message, a sudden text meant to appear misdirected, followed by an apology intended to plant seeds of curiosity or jealousy. Then there's the nostalgic hook, where they reference a song, a familiar location, or a shared memory, strategically chosen to bypass logic and stir longing for the idealized past. And finally, when more overt tactics fail, they resort to the silent Hoover, watching your stories, liking very old posts, or orbiting your social circle just enough to signal their presence without breaking the appearance of distance. This collection of strategies marks the narcissist's descent into true desperation, a desperate attempt not just to regain control, but to restore the emotional scaffolding that allowed them to feel stable, powerful, and real. When a narcissist tries to reclaim space in your life, they often begin with quiet, calculated gestures, subtle attempts to make their presence felt again without uttering a single word. It's like a silent knock at your digital doorstep, meant to test whether you'll respond. But when their craving for validation intensifies, they escalate beyond these predictable moves and lean into far more manipulative, deeply engineered hoovering tactics. One of the most deceptive forms is what many call the "I've changed" hoover. It usually arrives in the form of a long, emotional message where they claim to have undergone a profound awakening. Suddenly, they've been in therapy, found spiritual clarity, or finally realized everything after losing you. They echo back the very insights you begged them to understand for years, packaging the illusion of accountability just convincingly enough to pierce your hope and empathy. Yet the persona they present is nothing more than a temporary performance, a script crafted to get back through the door. The moment you let them in, that new person evaporates. Another insidious tactic is what can be called the closure trap. In this maneuver, they reach out requesting a final conversation, just one last talk, so they can apologize properly and help you both move on. But this promise is a complete fabrication. A narcissist has no interest in giving you closure. What they want is an opening. This request becomes their foot wedged in the door, a strategic invitation to pull you back into a conversation, a room, or a phone call where they can test whether they still hold emotional influence over you. It's not closure they're seeking, it's access. And once they have just an inch, they push for a mile. Then comes the emergency hoover, an assault aimed directly at your empathy and sense of responsibility. This goes far beyond the usual claims of not feeling well. Instead, they manufacture extreme, urgent crises, being stranded in a dangerous place, facing jail time, or teetering on the brink of eviction. The narrative is crafted to trigger your instinct to help, hoping you'll override your no-contact boundary. Their desperation becomes the fuel behind these dramatic fabrications. At this stage, pride collapses entirely. Their emotional distress becomes overwhelming, and they scramble to find anyone, especially you, who can temporarily patch the gaping void they feel. They soon realize that the new supply they secured can't sustain them because their emotional capacity works like a bucket riddled with holes. Nothing stays inside. No amount of love, attention, or reassurance can ever fill them. They are bottomless, and every person who tries to love them ends up pouring endlessly into an unfillable vessel. Meanwhile, the new supply is experiencing the same exhausting cycle you once lived through, desperately trying to satisfy needs that can never truly be met. The narcissist begins to panic as this new source starts to dry up. Without you available and without a stable replacement, they spin deeper into desperation. This is when their behavior becomes extreme. Elaborate stories, false emergencies, and even fabricated tragedies, such as claiming a beloved pet is on the brink of death, are all deployed to provoke a reaction from you. These stories give them just enough mental stimulation to feel a momentary illusion of control, especially if they believe their messages will eventually reach you. But this short-lived relief is never enough. What they really crave is the full dominance and emotional supply that comes from pulling you back into their orbit, allowing them to feed on your attention consistently once again. When a narcissist is completely cut off from their primary supply, the internal collapse that follows is intense. Their entire psychological framework is built upon a foundation of emptiness, and without someone to feed their fragile self-image, they are forced to confront the abyss within themselves. This internal implosion prevents any real sense of peace or happiness, revealing the underlying truth that narcissists live in a constant state of misery, and in turn feel compelled to drag others into the same suffering. If their attempts at hoovering fail and you remain steadfast in no contact, the desperation doesn't dissolve, it mutates. It hardens into rage. Their inability to generate internal stability leaves them repeating the same destructive behaviors while somehow expecting a different outcome each time. This cycle of failed strategies is a clear marker of delusion. In this heightened state, they begin weaving elaborate lies targeted specifically at the people closest to you. They may falsely accuse you of theft, financial harm, or other invented offenses. These accusations aren't random. They're designed to reignite a smear campaign. As their desperation deepens, the lies grow darker and more calculated. This tactic serves two purposes. First, it acts as retaliation, a way to punish you for escaping their control and forcing them to face their own emptiness. Second, it lays the groundwork for reputation management. By painting you as unstable or abusive, they attempt to preemptively destroy your credibility. Their goal is simple. If you ever speak out about who they really are, no one will believe you because the smear campaign has already done its work. But the most alarming moment arrives when this strategy also fails. When the hoovering doesn't work, the manipulations fall flat, the smear campaigns don't stick, and you remain unreachable, the narcissist reaches a level of desperation that strips them of all restraint. This is the point of ultimate psychological freefall. When you've already spoken openly to your friends and family, when the people closest to you finally understand what happened and recognize the narcissist's true nature, their entire system of manipulation begins to collapse. Once the flying monkeys stop carrying their messages, or even worse for them, begin defending you instead, the narcissist is thrust into a corner. They are no longer simply deprived of your emotional supply. They are also losing the secondary support they used to gather from their enablers, the people who once validated their stories without question. With both sources of fuel drying up simultaneously, their behavior spirals into a level of chaos that becomes impossible to ignore. The stories they tell grow stranger and more inconsistent, unraveling the moment anyone asks a basic question. They may stage dramatic public scenes or emotional collapses, grasping for any form of attention that can give them momentary relief. Now trapped entirely within their own hollow internal world, their panic reaches its climax, and they begin making desperate choices that are as dramatic as they are transparent. This is often when they suddenly check themselves into hospitals, psychiatric facilities, or rehabilitation centers, gestures crafted not purely out of crisis, but as strategic performances designed to pull you back into their storm. Each dramatic display is chosen to trigger your empathy, hoping it will override your sense of self-preservation. It's a highly manipulative illusion meant to make you feel responsible for their stability, as if your return is the only thing standing between them and complete collapse. But it is crucial to understand that these theatrics are unmistakable indicators of extreme desperation. In these moments, they regress into the most destructive patterns possible, falling back on behaviors that harm not only themselves, but also anyone who crosses their path. There is another aspect, one rarely discussed but vitally important, that highlights the depth of their desperation. When a narcissist struggles to secure the supply they typically seek in a heterosexual dynamic, do not underestimate the lengths they will go to obtain validation from any source available, including individuals of the same gender. For them, supply is not about sexual orientation, emotional intimacy, or genuine connection. It is simply a form of psychological anesthesia, a way to momentarily numb the unbearable emptiness within. When a person is addicted to that feeling of relief, the form it comes in no longer matters. It mirrors the behavior of an addict willing to consume whatever version of the drug they can access. The purpose isn't pleasure, love, identity, or desire. It is escape. It is a desperate attempt to silence the internal screaming and confirm, even for a moment, that they still exist through someone else's attention. This is why returning to a relationship with them is never an option once you break free. You cannot possibly know what forms of recklessness, destructiveness, or self-sabotage they have engaged in during their downward spiral. Their world becomes increasingly toxic, and the fallout affects everyone around them. This level of desperation is dangerous, not only for those they attempt to pull back into their orbit, but also for the narcissists themselves. Tragically, they often remain blind to the immense harm they inflict, both internally and externally, because their distorted worldview prevents them from acknowledging their own role in the chaos. It is at this point that a crucial warning must be given. If you find yourself tempted to respond, if a part of you thinks that maybe this time they truly learn from their suffering, you need to understand what will happen the exact moment you break no contact. The desperation you see now will vanish instantly. As soon as you reply, the panic dissolves, replaced first by relief, and then with startling speed by the same contempt and superiority that defined the earlier stages of the relationship. They will feel reassured of their power and emboldened by the knowledge that a little pressure is all that's needed to regain access to you. The devaluation that follows will be more vicious and abrupt than anything you endured before, because now they resent you. They resent the fact that you left. They resent the emotional collapse they experienced without you. But above all, they resent that you witnessed them at their weakest, stripped of their grandiose mask. You have seen the wizard behind the curtain, and for that, they will feel compelled to punish and diminish you even further to restore the hierarchy in their mind. If you are currently weathering frantic messages, sudden crises, fabricated emergencies, or escalating smear campaigns, it is essential to reinterpret what you're witnessing. None of this reflects love. None of it expresses genuine remorse. None of it suggests that they finally appreciate you as a human being. What you are seeing is pure dependency. It is addiction. It is panic over the loss of a resource that once provided a steady stream of validation. Their fear is not, "I miss you." Their fear is, "I miss the way you made me feel about myself." You were their mirror, and without it, they are confronted with their own fragmented emptiness. Do not confuse their desperation with your worth. Your true value is revealed in your ability to break the cycle, to uphold boundaries that were long overdue, and to continue walking toward your own healing, far beyond the reach of their chaos. If this message resonates with you, consider engaging with the content by liking the video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and sending it to someone who may need to hear it. Your participation helps strengthen this community, and I appreciate your presence here. I'll return soon with another video.